That beach house is mine, my daughter-in-law announced, holding up the key like she'd just won first prize right in the middle of our family brunch. My son didn't say a word. They'd already planned their move-in for the weekend. I didn't say anything either. At exactly noon, I opened my phone. The codes changed. Access was locked. And for the first time, they realized they'd badly underestimated me. The beach house up in Cape Cod is officially mine, starting today, Julia declared, waving the silver keyring like a trophy. My son Nathan gave me an uneasy glance but stayed quiet while his wife mentally rearranged the furniture. We were sitting in the sunroom of my house just outside Boston, the smell of fresh coffee and warm muffins hanging in the air. It couldn't quite cover up the chill settling over the table. Julia had been pushing for weeks for Nathan to take over the place so she could host fancy networking events for her marketing firm. Nathan, my only son, just nodded along, passively fiddling with his tie, while she rattled on about ripping out the old kitchen for something more modern and sleek. I took a slow sip of my black coffee and watched them calmly. They thought this house was already theirs to divide up like some inheritance prize. They'd forgotten one small detail. The property belonged to the Linden Family Trust, something my late husband and I had set up with careful planning to protect everything we'd built. Julia gave me this pitying little smile and said, "Martha, you wouldn't be happy there anymore anyway. Those stairs are way too steep for someone your age." I didn't smile back. All I felt was a deep, crystal-clear calm rising inside me. I knew they'd already booked a big move-in party for the next weekend, catering industry guests, the whole thing. They hadn't even bothered to ask if I might want to head up to the coast myself. Julia was already scrolling through the guest list on her tablet, while Nathan quietly poked at his eggs. I checked my watch, 11:45. In 15 minutes, the Trust's automatic systems would roll into the next phase, a clause I'd quietly activated months ago. My phone buzzed silently in my apron pocket, a quick note from the property manager up in Cape Cod. Everything was ready. While Julia waxed poetic about new curtain colors, I kept thinking of something my husband used to say. Trust is fine, but a solid framework is better. The game had just begun. "Hey, have you packed up your stuff from the upstairs bedroom yet?" Martha Julia asked casually, eyes glued to her screen. Nathan cleared his throat nervously, trying to smooth things over. "We can totally help you move the rest of your things into the city apartment, Mom." I set my coffee cup down without a sound and just watched the two of them. They talked about me like I was already a piece of furniture they needed to shove into a smaller corner. The nerve Julia had, acting like she could just claim what was mine, was something else. But I stayed quiet. It was 11:55. Under the table, I unlocked my phone and opened the security app that monitored all our properties. With one quick swipe, I changed the beach house access from family to restricted primary beneficiary only. The system instantly generated new digital codes for every door and the front gate. Those shiny physical keys Julia was so proud of, suddenly just expensive paperweights. I looked Nathan straight in the eye. He looked away. He'd chosen his wife's ambitions over basic respect for his mother. "I haven't packed a thing," I said, calm and steady. Julia let out a short laugh. "Well, time's ticking. The contractors are showing up first thing Monday at 8. Right then, my screen lit up green, 12 o'clock. The trust was now fully under my sole control. Nathan was no longer listed as a co-decision maker, a direct result of him skipping out on his share of the maintenance costs last year. He didn't know it yet, but legally he was now just a guest in the world I managed. Outside, a light rain started tapping against the glass. Julia stood up and went to slip the keys back in her pocket, but I gently but firmly caught her wrist. "Leave those right there." "Julia," I said softly. The confusion on her face was the first win of the day. "What the hell is this?" Martha Julia hissed, trying to yank her arm free. I held on until she dropped the keys on the table. Nathan stared at us, stunned. "Mom, we talked about this. I need the house for my career," he stammered, but his voice came out thin and unconvincing. I didn't answer right away. I picked up the keys and slipped them into my own pocket. "That house isn't a toy for throwing marketing parties, Nathan," I said, matter-of-factly. "It's a legacy that comes with real responsibility, something neither of you has shown so far." Julia's face flushed red, her voice turning shrill. "You can't do this to us. The invitations are already out. The catering's paid for. We have rights." I stood up slowly and smoothed my apron. "Rights. You two haven't even lifted a finger to paint the place in 2 years, but now you want to use it as a backdrop. That's not how this works." Just then, Nathan's phone buzzed. It was an automated alert from the beach house security system. "Access denied. Please contact the administrator." He stared at the screen color draining from his face. "You changed the codes," he whispered, shocked. I gave a small nod. "I professionalized the management. If anyone wants to use the house, they'll follow the new trust rules." Julia was practically fuming now. "That's my house. You promised it to us." I looked at her evenly. "I never promised anything. Your husband made assumptions that don't match what's actually written in the trust documents." Without another word, I started clearing the dishes. The silence that filled the room was heavy. Nathan sat there looking like a little boy whose favorite toy had just been taken away. He stared at me as if seeing for the first time the woman who hadn't merely inherited the family legacy she had built and guarded it with iron discipline alongside her late husband, and now she alone protected it. He'd always mistaken my quiet for weakness, a fatal mistake, and now it was costing him. Julia switched tactics. She sat back down, took a deep breath, and forced a sweeter tone. "Martha, we're family. Let's be reasonable. We only need the house for this 1 month to stabilize the business." I set the coffee pot aside and looked her straight in the eye. "If this is about business, Julia, then let's talk business. Peak season rental for the house runs about $3,000 a week." Nathan nearly choked on his water. "Rent from your own son." I didn't flinch. "The trust has to cover upkeep. Since you both refused to chip in for property taxes and insurance last year, there's no more free ride. This is purely financial." I watched Julia clench her jaw. She'd been counting on treating the place like a free perk she could plug into her company books. "This is ridiculous," she said coldly. "We'll just drive up there and call a locksmith to open it." Nathan's still named on the trust paperwork. I paused and almost smiled. Nathan's listed as a beneficiary, not as the authorized manager. Any locksmith will call the police if you try breaking in without a valid code. I already instructed the security company to report any unauthorized attempts. Nathan dropped his head. He knew me well enough to understand I didn't make empty threats. He also knew I'd kept careful records of every dollar I'd put into his education. "So how much would it cost us to still have the party this Saturday?" he asked quietly. I told him the weekly rate plus a damage deposit for the hardwood floors, the same ones Julia had said would need to be ripped out anyway. Julia shot up from her chair. "We're not paying a dime. We're leaving." "Come on, Nathan." She stormed out of the sunroom. Nathan hesitated, looking at me like he wanted to say something, but then he followed her like a shadow. I stayed behind, surrounded by the leftovers of a brunch that was supposed to be a celebration, but ended up a lesson. I knew they'd try to wear me down, but my mind was made up. Once the door clicked shut, an unusual but welcome peace settled over my home. I sat down at the little desk in my study that still carried the faint scent of my husband's pipe tobacco. My phone wouldn't stop lighting up. Julia was firing off angry texts, one after another. "You're destroying our lives. How can you be so heartless? Don't expect us at Christmas." I didn't even finish reading them, just archived the whole thread. Emotional blackmail had never worked on me. Instead, I logged into my online banking. I looked at the monthly automatic transfers I'd been sending to cover Nathan's insurance and his fancy leased car. They weren't huge amounts, but they'd kept him living comfortably without real worries. With 3 clicks, I canceled them all. If they claimed they needed the beach house for their business, then it was time they started covering their own private bills. Nathan was long overdue to take full responsibility for his life. That evening, my sister-in-law called. "Martha, what on earth is going on? Julia's been calling everyone saying you threw them out." I stayed calm. I didn't throw anyone out. I simply clarified the trust's usage rules. If you want to be an adult, you have to be able to pay the bills. She was quiet for a second, then gave a soft laugh. "You're right, Martha. You've always been the sensible one. Don't let them push you around." I made myself a cup of tea and gazed out at the darkening garden. Tomorrow was Monday, and I knew Julia would probably still send the contractors up to Cape Cod anyway, thinking her word would carry more weight than the actual owners. I picked up the phone and called the painter she'd hired. I'd known him for years. "Good evening, Mr. Reynolds. I'm calling about that Monday appointment at the beach house." 5 minutes later, that front was handled too. Monday morning, I was already in the kitchen at 7 with the newspaper. I could picture Julia speeding up the coast in her sleek SUV, convinced she was about to lay the foundation for her fancy new office space. At 8:15, Nathan called, sounding completely rattled. "Mom, the contractors just left. Mr. Reynolds said you canceled the job because you're the one who hired him." "That's right," I said, evenly turning the page. "I'm the only one authorized to approve any changes to trust properties. No plans were submitted to me. No approval given. So I canceled it." Nathan huffed in frustration. "We're standing outside the gate and the code doesn't work." Julia's yelling at the security guy on the phone. I took a sip of tea. "Tell Julia to stop yelling. The staff is just doing their job. If you want to get in, you can pick up the key from the local management office in town once you sign the rental agreement I emailed you both last night." "Rental agreement? This is insane!" he burst out. "We're your kids! And that's exactly why I'm teaching you how the real world works," I said firmly. "You're 35 years old, Nathan. It's embarrassing that you still expect everything handed to you for free while treating me at every dinner like I'm not all there anymore." It was the first time I'd said it so plainly. Silence fell on the other end of the line. Nathan hung up. I knew they were probably sitting in the car blaming each other or cooking up new schemes. But no paintbrush was touching those walls in Cape Cod today. I pulled on my gardening gloves and went outside to tend my roses. The physical work helped clear my head. I wasn't sad, I was relieved. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like an ATM constantly being raided. I felt like a woman in charge of her own life again. That afternoon, the security camera showed their car pulling away from the property. They'd given up for today. Tuesday morning brought the next wave, but quieter this time. Nathan called his voice thick. "Mom, my car lease payment didn't go through. The bank says the account's short because your transfer didn't come in. I was trimming flowers in the living room." "That's right, Nathan. I stopped the monthly support. Since you're such a successful businessman now with big real estate plans, I figured you wouldn't need those little amounts anymore." It was a tough lesson, but a necessary one. Nathan had been living beyond his means for years, quietly covered by my generosity, while Julia called me old-fashioned and holding them back. "But how am I supposed to pay for the car?" he asked, almost desperate. "Maybe sell that expensive watch Julia got you for your birthday, the one bought with the money I loaned you to start your firm," I suggested. I heard him breathing heavily. He knew I was right. Soon after Julia called, she'd dropped the sweet act. "You're a vicious old woman, Martha. You want to ruin us just because we want to live our lives." I stayed perfectly calm. "No, Julia. I'm letting you live your lives on your own dime. That's what you wanted, right? Independence from the older generation." I hung up before she could reply. Word started spreading around town. Julia tried painting me as confused to our mutual friends, but my longtime circle knew better. They knew my discipline. One of my oldest friends, a retired banker, called and chuckled. "Finally, Martha. I've been wondering when you'd turn off the spigot. The boy needs to learn to stand on his own 2 feet." For the first time since losing my husband, I felt truly strong again. I wasn't a burden to be managed. I was the one holding the resources, and I was only going to share them where they were truly valued. I started planning a solo trip to Italy. No one's permission needed. Thursday approached the day Julia had planned to start setting up her grand beach event. Her social media was already buzzing with teasers, exclusive gathering at our new coastal outpost. I followed the posts with a touch of irony. She still hadn't signed the rental agreement, probably hoping I'd cave at the last minute. I didn't cave. Instead, I sent an official notice to the security team and local authorities that no events were approved on Linden Trust property that weekend. By Thursday afternoon, Julia had to pull the plug. She posted a short, angry update. "Due to unforeseen technical issues, our event has been postponed. We're shocked by the unreliability of certain partners." Certain partners, I thought, sipping my white wine. She couldn't even admit she'd run into a wall she'd built herself with her own arrogance. That evening, Nathan showed up alone. He looked exhausted. He sat in the kitchen, and we sat in silence for a long time. "She's losing it, Mom," he finally said. "She has every right to be upset," I replied. "But she's not in charge here. And neither are you, as long as you keep acting like her assistant." Nathan looked at me. "I got too used to the easy life, didn't I?" I nodded. "Yes, you did. And you let her treat me with disrespect just to protect that comfort. That was your mistake." He seemed to be thinking it over. For the first time in months, he looked like my son again, not Julia's puppet. He didn't ask for money. He didn't ask about the house. He just asked, "Can we ever talk like normal again?" "That's up to you, Nathan," I said. "But the old days where I paid for everything and stayed quiet are over." He stood, gave me a quick kiss on the cheek, and left. It was a small step, but an important one. Julia, on the other hand, still had a long way to go. She was already plotting her next move, but I was 2 steps ahead. Friday morning, I made a decision that would lock the family power structure in place for good. I called my nephew Ethan, a modest, incredibly capable young man who'd studied environmental science and loved the outdoors. He'd never fought over the inheritance and had always pitched in with repairs at the beach house without ever asking for anything in return. "Ethan," I said on the phone, "I want you to take over official management of the trust properties. You'll have a set budget and full say over scheduling. If Nathan or Julia want to use the house, they'll have to go through you from now on." Ethan was surprised, but agreed. He understood how much the place meant to me. He was the perfect choice to protect the properties from Julia's selfish plans. I sent a short email to Nathan and Julia, introducing Ethan as the new manager. The reaction was immediate. Julia called raging, "This is an insult. Putting that country boy above us." I listened to her yelling for exactly 3 seconds, then hung up and blocked her number for the weekend. It felt incredibly freeing. I finally had a buffer between me and her greed. Saturday afternoon, I drove up to Cape Cod myself, not for a party, but for the quiet. The house was clean, the air smelled of salt, and the gate stayed closed to anyone who didn't respect the history of the place. Ethan was already there, checking the heating. We shared coffee on the terrace. "It's a beautiful spot, Aunt Martha," he said. "Would have been a shame to turn it into some loud party venue." I looked out at the ocean. Nathan and Julia were probably back in their Boston apartment, fighting over their collapsed dreams and unpaid bills. I felt no pity, just a deep sense of satisfaction. I'd protected my legacy and given my son a real chance to finally grow into a man. Whether he took, it was up to him. I'd done my duty to my late husband and to myself. The power balance was now clear for everyone to see. A month had passed. I sat on the terrace of the beach house watching the first sailboats dot the water. My life had changed completely. Nathan had started paying down his debts, and what surprised me most, he'd split from Julia. He told me her true colors came out fast once the money dried up, and the fancy beach house slipped out of reach. It hurt him, but he seemed lighter, freer. He visited me most weekends now, and he never showed up empty-handed. He'd bring a pie or help Ethan chop firewood. He'd learned not to treat the key like a birthright, but as a privilege you earn through presence and care. We talked again, honestly, without Julia's toxic ambitions poisoning the air. She'd moved on hunting for a new target for her networking dreams. The trust was thriving under Ethan's management. He'd renovated a couple of the smaller city apartments sustainably and rented them at fair rates, just as my husband would have wanted. I only handled the big, strategic decisions now. My phone often stayed off for hours. The digital control I'd taken back that brunch morning had become a solid structure that gave the family real security instead of fueling fights. That morning, there was a knock at the terrace door. It was Nathan. He had 2 bikes ready. "Want to ride out to the lighthouse, Mom?" he asked with a smile. I stood up, smoothed my summer dress, and nodded. I'd love that sun. But we need to be back in time. I promised Ethan I'd go over the new garden planting plans with him. I felt a deep contentment. I wasn't the bitter old woman Julia had called me. I was the guardian of our legacy. I hadn't fought with lawyers, I'd used consequences. My empire wasn't just houses and money. It was the respect I'd taken back. As we pedaled along the shore path, I knew the family's future was secure, not through handouts, but through clear boundaries. I breathed in the fresh sea air and smiled. The house was mine. The control was mine. And for the first time in a long while, my heart felt light again. Some things aren't lost in a single moment, you just never truly had them in the first place. And when you finally take the control back, you see exactly who belongs where in your life.